Hey, my name is Brian Anderson. I'm the VP of Technology to Eagle Technologies. As always, I have a little help from some of my friends. So also with us, we have Dustin Pazia. You want to say hi, Dustin?
Hey.
So you may not know Dustin yet. He's the FNG. So he actually primarily is covering St. Louis and Missouri, but we all work as a team. So don't be surprised if you see him in Nebraska or Oklahoma one of these days. And then we also have someone you've probably seen way too many times, Anthony Schweitzer. You want to wave, Anthony? So Anthony's going to be helping with the content as well. So before we get into the presentation, I just wanted to kind of cover what our inspiration for this content was. There's no vendor content in this. We're not trying to sell you anything today. The content from this presentation is literally from two main sources. So ever since we built out our in-house pen testing, we've had a lot of visibility into how a hacker actually works. Our pen test organization, we don't run Nessus scans and produce PDF reports. We actually use the same tips, tools, and tactics that a threat actor uses. And I'm actually going to show that here in a couple of minutes. So that's been really enlightening, and it developed a lot of this content. The other thing, unfortunately, that has developed this content is just the sheer amount of breaches that we've been helping customers with. We're averaging every 3 or 4 weeks a massive outage for one of our customers, a downtime event where we send out boots on the ground. And we've learned quite a bit from that exposure as well. So you're going to see that hopefully throughout the content. So let's go ahead and get some other house cleaning out of the way as soon as I have focus there. All right. So some of these slides are absolute eye charts, and we're trying to boil the ocean today. And so the reason I'm telling you all of that is sharing is caring. If you like or you see any value in any of this content, we are more than happy to send you a PDF out of the whole presentation. There's even a couple of slides I won't speak on. I just put in here so you could reference them later. So I've been sitting in a lot of security related presentations, and they literally all start the same. They try to get your attention, maybe even scare you a little bit. They show you how much money people are spending on ransomware. They show you everybody that's been in the news lately. We're all aware of the fact that it's not uncommon to go on NBC, right, and see people talking about breaches. I've got one here actually highlighted in orange that's going on right now, where Russia is probing a bunch of managed service providers for public cloud. It's essentially a supply chain attack, trying to get people, trying to get access to the folks that hold the keys for other companies. So what I thought would be different, I'm going to kill my camera here so I can focus on the content, would be to actually use that experience that we've gotten from our own pen test org and talk about the methodology, the entry and propagation that bad actors actually use to gain a foothold in your environment. So I hope you guys enjoy this, and hopefully maybe you haven't seen this before. So they have to get in somehow, right? And a bad actor or a red team or a pen tester, they're all happy to weaponize exploits and vulnerabilities. But the problem with that is as soon as they resignature something or they weaponize something, maybe Sentinel-1 starts catching it, maybe Defender starts catching it, right? So it's a real cat and mouse game. So what everyone figured out a long time ago is it's far easier to prey on humans and human trust. So I've seen statistics as high as 92% of all attacks start with phishing campaigns. So what you have on the screen here is a relatively sophisticated but common phishing campaign. And so I'm going to kind of talk through this. So what we start with are all open source free utilities. There's an open source framework called GoPhish that can manage this entire process for you. We build out some content or some VMs in the Azure Content Delivery Network. The reason we do that is because for a company to take down Azure CDN, that would take a huge slice of the internet down. We then buy expired domains that already have been trusted, or we buy a domain that resembles a company name and we sit on it for 30+ days until it's not flagged as a new domain. And our goal here is to send you a crafted email with a link that you click on that looks trusted, even if you've been through cybersecurity awareness. And of course, that redirects you back to the GoPhish framework, and ultimately it gets you to something evil, and it has evil in the name, called Evil Jinx 2. So this is a standalone man-in-the-middle attack framework, and it's used for phishing login credentials. And what's scary is it can even bypass two-factor authentication. So what we do here is we proxy what you think you're logging into. We pull in real time what the login page looks like. Say, for instance, here, Office 365. You put in your credentials, And if you don't have MFA, we go ahead and forward you to Office 365 and you're none the wiser. If you have MFA, we grab a session token and we forward you on to where you think you were going. So at this point, you are literally none the wiser. You don't know anything's happened. If we have your credentials, we can attempt to breach your corporate network. If we just have a session, for instance, with Office 365, we will then craft a curated spear phishing campaign against other users in your organization. So an example I recently saw is somebody fell for this trick. We went to the company's org chart on their webpage. You should take those down. And we realized they were in charge of meeting minutes and they hadn't written meeting minutes in 2 months. So we crafted a curated email. We sent it to the company. We apologized for not having gotten to the minutes, and we asked them to review the attachments and make sure we had gotten everything. So now we were able to take just an MFA session token and we were able to craft a curated email that allowed us to get into a corporate network. So that's just the entry, right? What we want to do next is we want to build out a command and control framework. So if you start over on the right side, excuse me, you've got either a real bad actor or you've got a pen tester. He's got this command and control framework. We're going to actually show you what that looks like on the next slide. But then he builds out multiple redirectors that can be anywhere on the internet. They're meant to obscure his location. They're also meant to confuse any blue team operator that's attempting to figure out what's going on. These will only reply back to certain machines with certain protocols. And then inside your organization, we start with one compromised machine. That's typically referred to as a beacon. It will communicate to the redirectors and ultimately the C2 server using obfuscated or encapsulated traffic. It'll look like Zoom traffic. It'll look like just regular application traffic. And then internally, we'll have 1 or 2 beacons as we move laterally. And every other machine that we get a foothold in will actually only talk to the beacons. They funnel the traffic outbound. Once again, we're trying to limit indicators of compromise, and we can change what that traffic looks like on the fly. So nowadays, the average soak time in an environment is 6 months, right? 5 years ago, as soon as we had that initial machine, we would encrypt everything we could. We would ask for $1,000. Now we want to sit here for 6 months and try to move laterally, try to gain privilege escalation, and enforce maximum damage for when we actually attack. So I mentioned that command and control framework. This is what it looks like. The most popular one, which is also the one that Eagle uses, is Cobalt Strike. It's actually a legitimate piece of software. There's a vetting process to purchase it, but fun fact, there's no honor among thieves. Over 70% of successful ransomware attacks last year were managed with Cobalt Strike. And as you can see here, we can map out attack frameworks. We can change that protocol I mentioned earlier. We can explore processes, launch scripts, look at their desktop. It's really frightful how easy these off-the-shelf components, how much visibility we get into the network. But it doesn't end here. Once we build out a command and control framework, we get into what we call the post-exploitation phase. And Dustin, I said it right this time. That's amazing. A really good example of that is domain enumeration. So typically the first thing any bad actor does is they look at your Active Directory. And once again, there's free tools for this. You guys can download Bloodhound. You can play with it in your own corporate environment. It does scary things. It will map out attack plans. It'll notice nested groups, misconfigurations in your group policy. It'll notice that you've got aging authentication and communication protocols enabled. And so for instance, it may say, hey, you're on this machine. You can RDP to this machine. There's an open session on that machine from a domain admin. Or for instance, it will say, I noticed that someone is running a service on this machine as a domain admin. And so I can use something called Kerberoasting, and I have a direct path to privilege escalation. So it's basically a map, right? And what something like Bloodhound might let us understand is that maybe you haven't disabled something called LLMNR. So this is an old discovery protocol that I bet most of the folks on this phone have enabled. And it's vulnerable to attack. So if a machine reaches out to DNS and it says, hey, where is this guy? DNS says, I don't know who you're talking about. You will then, with LLMNR, broadcast on your layer 2 network, and you will ask other machines if they know who that is. The problem here is a compromised machine will say, hey, I know who that is, send me your hash. And boom, you've got a hash. So if it's an 8-character password, we can crack this on a Raspberry Pi in 5 minutes. Once again, keeping in mind that we're soaking for up to 6 months. If it is a strong password, we will send it outbound. We'll implement things like jitter to break up the transfer, and then we can work on it on a machine with a $300 GPU and hack it in a matter of days or weeks. So I've got some takeaways on the next slide, but once again, if you don't need LLM&R or NetBIOS or NTLM authentication in your network, you got to turn it off. This makes it very easy for a bad actor to move laterally. So once again, hopefully this is something you may not have seen before, and it's been enlightening. But the playbook, it may play out 100 ways, but it always works the same. They gain initial entry, they build out a command and control framework, and then they work on privilege escalation and lateral movement until they believe they have enough, they have good enough hooks in your environment that they can go after that goal. All of these tools are off the shelf. You can download the vast majority of them off of GitHub. There are YouTube tutorials how to use them. I've watched a couple. And a lot of people, for instance, think that password security, having strong passwords is enough. Not if you've got some of these old protocols enabled, right? Or if you're on a machine and you can dump the LSASS hashes right out of memory. Items like Mimikatz could then crack those passwords. I think we even showed here that with MFA, it's not bulletproof. We can grab session tokens, right? So one of the big takeaways from today that we'll mention multiple times is that lateral movement is the devil. And second, this average soak time of 6 months is also equally devastating. You've got to prevent this. You've got to detect them right when they get in your environment. So this is kind of an aside, but I recently went to Newegg, went to their webpage, tried to log in. They redirected me back to my inbox, which I found really annoying because I wanted to go see if their GPUs were available. And then I realized what they were doing is they were implementing phish-proof MFA. They'd come up with a way to keep me from inadvertently clicking on an Evil Jinx proxy web login, right? So don't be surprised if you see more of this where you get redirected to, for instance, your inbox, which is essentially a second factor of authentication. Kind of cool. So what do we do about this? If you talk to a pen tester, they all say the same thing. It's not a matter of when, it's if. I mean, it's not a matter of if, excuse me, I totally messed that up. It's a matter of when you're going to have someone get into your environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over some must-haves, some low-hanging fruit. A lot of this is stuff you can do for free, stuff you already have in your environment. So let's just go ahead and get into it. So for time's sake, we can't go through all of this in great detail. So we created a list of must-haves, and I'll freely admit that a lot of customers probably don't even have all of this. A traditional firewall is great, but having something that uses deep packet inspection and has a built-in intrusion prevention system is really important. I would think that most people here are applying frequent security updates for Microsoft apps, but also having something that scans third-party apps, right? Knowing that that Apache instance that was deployed as part of a software package, it hasn't been updated in 3 years, knowing that it has vulnerabilities is very important. That's another issue with lateral movement through an environment. You absolutely have to do email scanning. Zero trust is more of a journey than a destination, but we need to get away from the era of having godlike domain admin accounts that can do anything in the environment. As we build out new permissions, we need to think about least available permissions. You want to assume a breach has happened, and you want to make it really hard for them to move through your environment. MFA is a biggie nowadays. We're starting to see insurance providers say we're not even going to provide you with cyber insurance unless you implement MFA for remote accounts. We would highly recommend them for domain admin and privileged accounts as well. And then complex passwords. So I think NIST Standard 1 says it should be at least 10 characters and unique. Our pen testers will tell you that for users, they should be at least 15 characters, so it's harder to brute force. And I've read recent articles that say for service accounts and domain admin accounts, they should be as long as 28 characters. Once again, you're trying to make it so they can't brute force it in a certain amount of time. And then finally, a little obvious, but you need regular backups. You need to follow the 3-2-1 rule I've got here.
Yeah, Brian, and another thing I want to add too is if you have, global admin accounts for Office 365 or Azure tied back to a domain admin account on-prem, really need to break those up. So that's a really easy thing to do. and just keep that separation. So that'd be part of zero trust, and break out those accounts, keep it from, if I'm using it publicly, I don't want someone to have rights to my internal network too. So that'd be easy win.
And I see a question coming in about, do we see customers going back to tape? That's a great question. We're actually going to cover that here in a second. So let's talk about what you can do for the Microsoft side. Patching is great, but as I showed you during that entry and propagation example, the first thing they look at is Active Directory. So there are quite a few things you can do that don't cost anything but your time. The first, which we already covered, is disabling older protocols, right? If you don't have aging applications that need NTLM, you should disable it. And there's also ways to essentially disable NTLM, but only allow certain servers to use NTLM authentication. You need to disable those older discovery protocols as well. I think we gave an earlier example also of delivering payloads in Acrobat or Office. So you want to limit or disable macro capabilities. If you read any blogs on how to use projects like Mimikatz to download hashes and hack them, a lot of them use PowerShell scripts. So you want to convert over to signed PowerShell scripts and enforce that at an Active Directory level. Speaking of grabbing hashes, one of the easiest ways to do this is to attack the local security subsystem service, LSASS. Windows has actually implemented something called Windows Defender Credential Guard. You can enable this in group policy. You need a TPM and at least I think Windows 10 Pro, but it basically takes that whole local security subsystem and it containerizes it into a little VM so that folks have a much harder time grabbing those hashed passwords, which you can see with Bloodhound can make it much more difficult for them to get privilege escalation. And then finally, we've got it in red because this is a biggie. If you have shared local admin accounts in your environment, and I imagine a lot of folks do, just like my high school girlfriend's phone number, I can still remember all of my local admin passwords when I worked at my last org because we had them forever. Microsoft has something called LAPS, the Local Administrator Password Solution. It's a series of group policy extensions. It will randomize all of your local administrator passwords, and then it stores them in Active Directory where you can specify groups of people that have the ability to see those passwords. If you have a shared password, you probably set it 5 years ago, it's probably only 8 characters. If somebody can hack that in 5 minutes, talk about lateral movement. They have your whole environment now, right? That is scary and you want to avoid that. So what we've seen in the past maybe year and a half is that bad actors are starting to attack backup environments. We had a recent customer that had a funky VDI server, a VDI machine. There's a lot of egress traffic, high CPU. So they went ahead and just shut it down. They were going to look at it later. Well, what they didn't know they did is they had actually shut down a beacon server, right? So the bad actor assumed that they'd been had and they launched their attack. They apparently had been there long enough that they had gained privilege escalation. So the first thing they did is they trashed the backup servers and then they began encrypting the files. As the user put it, it was like poking a hornet's nest, right? I had no idea what was about to happen. So the point here is you want to harden your backup environment. And good news, if you're an Eagle Commvault customer, we actually build a custom engagement that does that. We do over 60 different things. It takes about a day and a half. But some of the biggies is we want to obfuscate those databases. That's one of the things bad actors frequently look at. We want to remove your entire backup infrastructure out of your Windows domain. So if someone becomes a domain admin, they can't kill your backups. We implement MFA, so we have a second factor of authentication. We install a mini filter driver so that only a specific process can see your backup data. I could go on and on, but once again, this all serves to mitigate or prevent a bad actor from trashing your backups. And if you're not a Commvault customer, let's say you're a Veeam customer, they have the Linux hardened repository. That's something I'm helping build a server for right now for a customer. There's other ways to tackle this problem, but you want to harden your backup environment. So I typically can't get through a conversation nowadays about anything, especially backups, without talking about immutable storage. And for the uninitiated, essentially an immutable backup, the definition varies, but you are protecting that data from accidental deletion. So this can be from a ransomware event, it can be from a human error, sometimes even bugs. But the way it's implemented varies. A popular option is to send an auxiliary backup copy out to S3 with object lock implemented. So now you've got a policy that says that I can't even delete the data once I've created it for a set amount of time. Azure and AWS have options here. Eagle has S3 object lock in our own managed service instance. We don't charge for ingress or egress, so the pricing is very consistent. Our customers like that. We had a question about tape. I've been having weekly conversations about this. So if you can go out there and spend, I'm just making this number up, 10K, and you can do an entire full backup on 1 or 2 tapes and put them in a cabinet, you have created a very effective air gap. And unless you've got, Tom Cruise dropping out of an HVAC vent on a steel line, your data's safe. So we're seeing that become very popular, very in vogue. And then finally, there's a lot of on-prem storage options as well. If let's say you're a Veeam customer, you can write to an Exagrid and they have immutability options. On-prem S3, so you can write to a Cloudian instance in your own data center if you have large data sets and you want to implement object lock. And we're going to actually talk about snapshots next. So modern arrays use something called a redirect on write architecture. And that means they have the basic underpinnings for immutability. They always write to new places. And then what the live block map is, it's a bunch of pointers that represent the file system. And similarly, when they take snapshots, they just take that metadata, all those pointers, to represent what the file system looked like at that point in time. And so before I talk about how you can harden those snapshots, we're always belaboring the point of how important snapshots are and how you should enable them in your environment. We always like to say the fastest way to restore data is not to have to move it at all, right? It's also important to mention that they have zero impact on your environment. And if you've got free space on your array, there's no reason you shouldn't be cranking up your retention. So it doesn't matter if you have hardened backup environments, immutable backup storage, you really want to protect your snapshots because it's going to be your first primary method to restore your data quickly. So if you're using just a generic admin account, and you've got it stored in KeePass sitting on the file server, that's a very bad idea. With soak time up to 6 months nowadays, they can hack that and get access to your SAN. We're starting to see SAN vendors roll out what are known as MFA protected snapshots. So you can create a policy and a subset of your snapshots are protected with a second factor of authentication. I've seen implementations where you have to contact support to restore those snapshots. But another thing that people don't think of is as folks move laterally through the environment, they may not necessarily need to gain access to your SAN. Maybe they get into vCenter and you've got a plugin that allows a bad actor to delete your snapshots. Maybe you've got backup integration. So you should really audit those plugins and those capabilities and make sure that you feel comfortable that you're not exposing yourself. Another thing that we saw, and it was a sad story that taught us this lesson, we had a customer that only had 3 days of snapshot retention. By the time they got to the point where they realized that the snapshots were the way to go, those snapshots had already aged off. And so that was a kick in the gut. So something you should do, we'll talk more about this, but when you realize you've had a breach, you need to freeze your snapshots and your backups so they don't age off. It's very important. And then if you work in an IR environment, you'll realize that snapshots have really fantastic forensic benefits. If we want to figure out how someone got in the environment, oftentimes we're going to bring up old copies of VMs. We're going to silo and study them. So if we haven't made this point well enough, Dustin and I went a little crazy here, and we've got Shia LaBeouf yelling at you, but turn those snapshots on, crank up the retention, remove dangerous integrations, and either implement MFA. Fun fact, Nimble's got this on the near-term roadmap, or guard that password with your life. So everything we've talked about so far is what we would call blue team or defensive security. What you also need to focus on is offensive security. You need somebody checking your doors, checking your locks. And as I think I said earlier, 5 years ago, you would ask someone if they had a pen test, and they'd say yes, but it was a Nessus vulnerability scanner. It was automated. It produced a PDF, and it was for an audit requirement. People are starting to understand that you need to hire someone to use the same tools and tactics that a bad actor is going to use to see if there's anything you need to focus on. And so this is something that Eagle does. And typically what we offer to customers, by far the most popular option, is an external black box penetration test. So the black box means we have zero knowledge of your environment. We are acting like an external attacker, and we are trying to collect information from known breaches. We are looking at your DNS, figuring out if you've got cloud infrastructure. We are crafting spear phishing and curated phishing campaigns. We are trying to get into your organization. So you should be doing that yearly, but if you start to fare well in that endeavor, typically we will also start talking about an internal gray box penetration test. So gray box means we have a little more information about your environment. You probably have told us about something you're concerned about. And to enable internal gray box testing, we do something that I think is kind of cool. We go ahead and send you out something that emulates a beacon in your environment. So this is a modified Raspberry Pi with Kali Linux. Kali Linux is for hackers. It has a bunch of these tools preloaded. And then we will engage in all of those tips and tools I talked about at the beginning of this presentation. We will use products like Bloodhound to probe your Active Directory. We will attempt to do port scanning, man-in-the-middle attacks, NTLM relay attacks. I've got it all here on the screen. And then we will produce a report, not only telling you what we have found, but giving you recommendations on how to fix it. So the one I haven't mentioned yet is white box pen testing. That is fully curated. We might be looking at source code, your web source code. It's very time intensive. It's very expensive. It's very rare that a customer would opt for that. Typically what folks opt for is yearly black box and ultimately yearly gray box internal testing. So one thing we get questioned about a lot when we're talking to customers about pen testing, is it exhaustive? Do we actually look at everything in the environment? And the answer is no. So a pen test is a guaranteed block of hours where you're going to look at the environment. You're going to look at low-hanging fruit, right? You're going to find the quickest path to penetration of the environment. And that's actually what bad actors do as well for multiple reasons, right? They're looking for the quickest gains. They also don't want to create unnecessary traffic because that can create indicators of compromise and they will be had. Something else I learned sitting on these pen test calls and working with our pen testers is that as they build these beacons and they resignature them and they weaponize vulnerabilities, Defender actually causes them the greatest grief. So that causes more problems for our red team than items like Sentinel-1 and Falcon AV. And Dustin and I have talked about this, and we think the reason that has happened is Microsoft, for their E5 customers, has something called ATP, Advanced Threat Protection. And the endpoint for that is Defender that comes shipped on any Windows laptop or desktop. So if you can read any external tests, Defender always rates in the top 3 nowadays. And the reason I'm talking about this is if you're spending money on something like Semantic AV, I would consider taking that budget and moving it to an EDR platform, which is something we're going to talk about here in a little bit.
Right. And one last thing to add there, Brian, with Microsoft Defender being on every Windows 10 machine out there, and you got to think about what Microsoft's intelligence is when it comes to endpoint protection, right? They've got every single device out there. And I don't even know how many there are, but that's a lot of data for them to come through and kind of design their, next phase of protection. So, just keep that in mind too. They might be the strongest out there with the most data. So.
Yeah, they have kind of an unfair advantage, right? With all the information. That's a good point.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, I'll talk a little bit about cyber insurance now and incident response. So, Brian, you want to hit next slide?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of cyber insurance. You might already have it. If you don't, you should really be looking into it for your organization. Depending on your coverage, cyber insurance will cover ransomware payouts up to a certain amount and pay for incident response assistance along with other coverage. Recently, Brian and I discovered an analysis that was done that reviewed the cybersecurity industry itself. And some of the concerns there are that some of the biggest premium holders, some of the big companies, they have a large portion of the payouts, right? So their policy may be $500 million. Well, the industry only is a $5 billion industry. So if multiple of them get attacked, there's a chance they might not be able to pay their ransoms, which is a big concern. So for them, they've kind of evolved into we got to scrutinize our customers more. We got to be more difficult to, we got to be more careful with who we get cyber insurance policies out to. So they're doing more aggressive things like looking at how your posture, your security posture, and probing you publicly before they offer you any sort of policy. So Brian, if you want to hit next slide, we'll go into kind of some of the stuff they're doing. So, this is just one I pulled from a cyber insurance provider. You can go get them online. You can do them yourself. They're really good to kind of measure your environments, where you stand among other people and other organizations. It's going to give you a list of, how are you doing in identity? How are you doing in your protection? And it's going to kind of give you almost a roadmap on here's what you need to do. So you can use this two ways, right? If you're going to go approach someone about cyber insurance, you can go do the self-assessment first, make sure you're not scoring really poorly. And then if you're doing a renewal, you could do the same thing, right? I want to make sure I want to lower my premium. So I'm going to go do X, Y, Z on this list and up my security posture before I go talk to them again. So good stuff. It's all formed on NIST and SANS, so it's all relevant to security practices. So if you need it, we can send it out to you. We have one, or you can go find one yourself. Go ahead. Next slide, Brian. All right, so this one's pretty cool. So this is something we pulled from Proofpoint, and basically it's statistics on when somebody agreed to pay the ransom. So 33% of the organizations in 2019, 22% of them never got their data back. Well, the bad actors got smarter, right? They realized that if I find someone who has poor security posture and poor defense, I can hit them over and over, right? So as you see in 2020, they just started asking for more money. So you come to them and say, all right, I'm going to pay your ransom. Well, they say, we want more money, right? They're criminals. They don't care about giving you your data back, and they might not give your data back. You might get to the point where you pay them and you get nothing back, right? So it's not perfect. Cyber insurance is there to protect you and help you, but it doesn't mean you can just ignore security posture. So go ahead, next slide, Brian. So like I said, they're making it more difficult, right? So we had a customer recently who was trying to get cyber insurance, and they went and talked to someone, and then they said, nope, we won't talk to you until you go get MFA. So now you got to do a company rollout of MFA before you can even, protect yourself. And if you're a bigger organization and it's more complicated, to roll out, it could take you 6 months, a year to get an MFA rollout. So now you're unprotected for that year or 6 months. So it's nice to kind of take this security posture or this cyber risk score and use that to kind of build yourself up before you get to the point where you have to talk to them. So you don't have to do these projects when it's risky, right? Go ahead, next. And last but not least, so incident response, right? So we've run into a few situations where we're actively working with the customer. One situation in particular, and they went out to their cyber insurance company and they said, hey, we have an incident, we need incident response assistance, and we're working with Eagle. Well, you guys can't work with Eagle, is what the cyber insurance company said. You can work with this list of 5 people, right? So now you got to go call a new incident response team who knows nothing about your organization, get them up to speed, right in the middle of an incident response, right? Killing time for you. So you know who you're going to work with, know what your cyber insurance will cover, and be ready to work with them, right?
Yeah, and Dustin, another interesting story is we had boots on the ground with a customer. Their data center was down, and their CFO walked out of the office and said, guys, I have to have 3 bids before I can choose to work with Eagle. So to sit on that for a second, the data center is down and their insurance company is telling them they have to get 3 bids. I mean, it's utterly ridiculous. So at Eagle, we stayed on and we said, well, you may not be able to pay us, but we can't leave. We have to help you. So we stuck around. And I still don't know if they were able to actually pay Eagle in that instance. But, to Dustin's point, you really need to reach out to your insurance provider and find out what the guardrails are, what your options are for incident response. Because if they tell you need 3 bids, you might want to shop around.
Right. And then the other thing you want to think about, hit next slide, Brian. The other thing you want to think about, not only that process, but how are you going to react? How is your team going to react? Right? Do you know how to do these things on this slide? Right? Do you know how to freeze snapshots? Do you know how to shut down network shares quickly? Right? Because when you're working in an incident, the last thing you want to be doing is Googling things, trying to figure out how to do X, Y, Z in your environment. If these guys don't know your environment and you haven't worked with this incident response team, they're going to ask you to do things that they don't have the knowledge. They don't have the tribal knowledge about your organization. So it's almost like you need to treat this the same as you would a DR playbook, right? Have an incident response playbook and have it offline, right? Have contact lists offline. The last thing you want is to be in a, an incident response event and not be able to access the contacts, right, of your organization and call people or know what the process is. So have a hard copy.
Yeah, typically when we work with firms during incident response, they have their infrastructure shut down, and our principal form of communication are cell phones, right? So we've worked with organizations that don't have the proper contacts on their cell phones, and little things like that can cause a lot of struggle and pain.
Right.
All right, thanks, Dustin. So if there's two things you take away today from our presentation, hopefully you get more than that, but the first is that the principal way, once again, upwards of 90% of breaches come from phishing. So the absolute best thing you can do for your organization is employ cybersecurity awareness training. So it really breaks down to three tasks, right? You have to train your employees on the different types of phishing, right? And it's not all just ransomware. It could be things like wire fraud, exfiltration, right? Bribery and extortion. So you need to train them on how that works. You need to generate and test fake phishing attacks and monitor employees that fail. And then you need to target those users for more education. And lots of times we get customers saying, well, what do I do? How do I educate customers that do continually fail and need more education? So we found another really great infographic from Proofpoint where they polled users with those questions. And interestingly enough, 20% of the folks that responded said there was actually an escalation path that ended in termination for repeat offenders. I can tell you that my wife works at a hospital and they routinely educate and test their users. And if they fail multiple times, it directly affects their compensation. It's a mathematical formula. So you could be the best employee in a department, you deserve the highest raise, and you're not going to get it because you were in a hurry that day and you clicked and failed your second phishing test. So this is once again a really big takeaway. Eagle has options we can talk to you about in this space. But this is something that should be really high on your task list if you're not already doing it. So I think the second, hopefully, big takeaway that you guys take today is the importance of EDR and variance of EDR. I still meet a lot of customers that don't have a really good grasp on what EDR does and how it's evolved to what it has. So I've got some slides I'm going to go through that kind of talk about the evolution of SIEM and EDR. So starting about 10 years ago, we started to see larger organizations invest in SIEMs. And what a SIEM does is it's a log aggregator. So you send all of your logs. They're stored in a database that allows for easy searching. You're centralizing all your data. You're kind of taking advantage of that notion of machine learning and big data. You're going to put all your data in one place. You may not have even figured out how to extract value out of it yet, but you want it there. And initially people used it for postmortems, finding out where people had logged in and out. But we started to see it evolve due to cybersecurity events to where these large organizations would hire threat researchers, full-time people. They would create custom queries. They would monitor alerts. They would interpret these alerts and create indicator of compromises. But of course, in the SMB space, that's not something that we can really afford to do. So we started to see a recognition and an evolution where we understood that bad actors had certain behaviors. So this is Lockheed Martin's cyber kill chain. It's very popular because at a high level, it talks about the path that a bad actor takes to reach their goals and objectives. And this one's great because you can educate users and employees on how this works. This has gotten much more complicated and has evolved to what is known as an attack framework. So the most popular attack framework is the MITRE attack framework. This eye chart is actually a distilled version of the MITRE attack framework. But what it seeks to do is it creates machine learning and behavioral analysis so that it knows that if these 2 steps or even these 20 steps occur in a certain sequence, that we have an indicator of compromise. There is the potential that someone has breached your environment. And the beauty of this, of course, is rather than waiting 6 months to find out you've been breached, you're actually catching indicators of compromise on day one. Right? And you're allowed to react before the bad actor moves laterally, before they gain privilege escalation. So that's why we keep saying this is another massive takeaway that we hope you guys get out of today's presentation. So really that behavioral analysis is what led to endpoint detection and response. There's a lot of flavors of it, but once again, it seeks to create indicators of compromise. It catches things like fileless attacks and people that are launching PowerShell scripts or probing and taking advantage of registry dependencies. It catches process and kernel hooks. So you deploy an agent on your endpoint, you grab as much data as you can. A lot of EDR products have evolved to start capturing NetFlow data as well. We're also now seeing them evolve to dynamically build honeypots and canary files so that if someone pokes at a fifth ESXi server that you don't even have, right? So no one in your organization would do it. We can create indicators of compromise. So EDR is not the end all be all, unfortunately, especially in the mid-market where we have a bunch of guys that are, jack of all trades, master of none. You guys don't have dedicated security operations center and staffing. You can see down at the bottom, Gartner recently said that you need 5 to 7 people to maintain a real SOC. So if you have a traditional EDR, you're still responsible for interpreting and responding to those alerts. That requires a lot of expertise and security knowledge. Mitigation's a manual process. So my point here is we've seen an evolution to a lot of products becoming MDRs. So instead of endpoint detection and response, that now stands for managed detection and response. The notion here is they're adding expertise. They're adding dedicated cybersecurity engineers that work with you to help you move through the whole process. And as you guys have heard us say lots of times at Eagle, we like to eat our own dog food or sip our own champagne. We actually use an MDR product called Arctic Wolf. And if anyone remembers that recent exchange, 0-day vulnerability, well, we actually had an incident then. So within 15 minutes of the incident, Arctic Wolf notified us that 2 files had been created on our Exchange server. So we were on the phone in about 5 minutes. I was on that call, and they showed us what had happened. And at that point, if I'd have had nothing, right, I wouldn't have even known this had happened. But if I would have had EDR, I still would have been kind of in an oh crap moment, because I now have to figure out if that server's been compromised fully. I have to figure out if they're still there, if they've managed to move laterally through my environment, right? But what we did is we sat on the phone and they made us feel good that no one had persisted in the environment, that they had not moved laterally, and they advised us to take that server offline and patch it. And then of course we monitored it for the next couple of days. We found out a couple of days later that the bad actors were actually probing sites in the US and they hadn't delivered payloads yet. They were just collecting who was vulnerable. And working with an MDR, we were allowed to detect that immediately and then understand how to mitigate it, right? Feel good about the fact they hadn't made it into our environment. So lastly, I don't have a slide on it, but you now see XDR mentioned quite a bit. XDR is typically EDR combined with next-gen AV. Lots of EDR products, you actually keep a separate AV product. And if you remember earlier, I said it's oftentimes a good idea to stop spending money on third-party AV, go back to Defender and invest in EDR. We're now seeing solutions called XDR that solve both problems. So everybody likes to talk about ransomware and immutability. I wanted to make one point here, and it's kind of helping us wrap up as well. But, ransomware is worrisome, but it's really not the only thing you should worry about. You should maybe even rephrase internally how you talk to your stakeholders, about what you're worried about and what you're focusing on. You can see in the chart below, in terms of successful phishing attacks, only half of those attacks even resulted in ransomware, right? There's lots of other concerns. There's data loss. Data exfiltration is becoming very popular, where they take data out of your environment. Once again, they're very sophisticated in the way they do this. It's not a large transfer. They impart jitter and latency on the client side so that it's just blips of data over a long amount of time. But once they have that data, they can extort the company for money. Worse yet, and they do this, they can extort customers. That has a huge reputational damage, right? If they take you down, you have a loss of online presence. People have been talking about this for 10 years as it relates to BCDR, how much money a company loses for being down just a day online. What we've seen here in the Midwest is customers are typically offline for around 30 days when they have a massive breach. So you can imagine the impact that has. And then financial losses are interesting. So a lot of you are familiar with GDPR, but you might not know that if you breach customer information, you can be fined 4% of your firm's global annual revenue. So not just the money you're making in Europe. We've seen 3 states so far in the United States create similar laws: California, Colorado, and Virginia, and I would expect that we'll see more. But this is something that Dustin worked on at his last company, and it can be a little onerous to wrap your head around GDPR and what the impacts are, and when you're actually in violation.
Right. Yeah. And think about it this way, right? It's not just about if you operate in that country. It's not if you have an establishment there. If I have customers that live in those countries, I have to be able to purge their data. I have to be able to purge their personal information from my systems. And if it's breached and I can't do that, that's a big old 4% fine. So yeah, it's scary stuff. So know if you're working in other countries, especially GDPR based ones.
Yeah, so once again, instead of talking about ransomware all the time, talk about your cybersecurity posture, right? So it starts with prevention. The biggie is cybersecurity awareness and training for your employees. The other biggie that causes a lot of issues is lateral movement, right? You can't make it easy for a bad actor to move easily in your environment, especially if you don't have something like endpoint detection and response. So using that zero trust model, healthy password management, hardening your operating systems, employing things like LAPS and Windows Defender, Credential Guard, disabling LLM&R, NetBIOS, NTLM. These are all really important steps that will prevent lateral movement inside your environment. We've said probably 17 times, the mean time to identify right now is currently over 6 months. That is how they enact maximum damage nowadays, right? So if you can employ a SEM, or better yet, an EDR and MDR, you have vastly improved the chances that you're not going to suffer a massive breach or downtime event. And as I talked earlier, that's starting to extend into creating honeypots and canary files, items in your environment that no one should ever touch, especially if they know your environment. So it tips you off that it's a bad actor. And then finally, spend some time thinking about incident response. Talk to your cyber insurance provider to understand those guardrails. Who am I allowed to call? Who am I allowed to work with? If you don't have cyber insurance, reach out to folks like Eagle to understand what that process would look like and how it would work. The last thing you want to do is to have your data center down and have to make a 5-minute decision on if you're going to pay some random company $25,000 to $50,000 to help you with incident response. We had a customer down for a month that spent $300,000 working with Verizon's cybersecurity division.
Yeah, just to add, Brian, we didn't add this on the slide, but I'd like to call it out. Just don't look at cyber insurance as the end all be all, and it's going to save you from everything, right? Don't let it become a crutch for you, right? It's just there to support you in the instance that you have an incident. So still improve that security posture and focus on that versus letting cyber insurance be the catch-all. Don't get too comfortable with just cyber insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a little cheat sheet we created. We're not going to go through all of this, hoping that you guys get a PDF of this. You can print it off and rely on it. 2 things I really haven't discussed yet I wanted to point out. You really should be doing annual pen testing. Reason being is all of this is changing so fast. You guys might kick major butt and do really well in 2021, and we might find massive holes in 2022, right? Kerber roasting, for instance, before that was around, we didn't have much concern about using elevated accounts for service accounts inside Active Directory. Now we do. The other thing is third-party risk management. More and more companies are paying people to evaluate the security posture of partners that you work with. A good example of that is that attack that is literally ongoing right now, where Russia is probing managed service providers trying to brute force or get into their environment so they can create supply chain attacks, right? So understanding the posture that your partners have is becoming very important. All right, and if you'll permit me just a couple slides to talk about Eagle, because it does relate to security. Some of you have seen this slide before. I'll move pretty fast, but we've been doing backup and recovery for decades. We're very good at it. We also do a lot of data center infrastructure, everything from compute to storage. Because of that backup and recovery mindset, we spend a lot of time talking to customers, for instance, about how to take advantage of data services like Snapshots. And all of that has made us very good at business continuity and disaster recovery, posture and education and implementation. And so all of that pulled us into security because we started working with folks 5 years ago that were going through these breaches. So, we've spent a lot of time and energy investing in cybersecurity solutions and being able to help folks with things like incident response and endpoint protection. And the point I would make is there's companies out there that specialize in backup and recovery. There's companies that specialize in security. I think you'll have a hard time finding a company that has confidence in all 4 pillars and can really help you proactively protect your data, right? And then understand how you need to react and increase your security posture in an ongoing fashion. So sorry, I had to toot our own horn there for a second. So, examples of that is Eagle's ongoing specialty in BCDR, our growing security solution and suite. We do pen testing. We've had a lot of success in the mid-market with Arctic Wolf. We're a consumer as well. And then a company I haven't mentioned yet, Kadelsky Security. They're kind of a catch-all for us. They have a really deep talent bench. They help us with incident response. They can do some really great cybersecurity and public cloud security assessments, virtual CISOs. They can do a lot. And we are actually evaluating, I think, 3 security products right now. We're having our own pen test organization bang on them. So don't be surprised to see some new solutions coming forward that we think are going to help our customers even more.